Dear colleagues, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to who is with us on WebEx and to who is now joining us on Facebook Live. We are delighted to be back live again in your company. The Geneva Environment Network has the pleasure to welcome you today virtually for the second session of the Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues, organized in collaboration with the Basel, Rotterdam and Stockholm Convention Secretariat, the Center for International Environmental Law, the Global Governance Center at the Graduate Institute, Norway and Switzerland. For those who don't know yet our platform, we are a network of more than 100 institutions and secretariats based in Geneva that make this region one of the global hubs for environmental governance. Administrated by the United Nations Environment Programme and supported by Switzerland, we organize various networking activities, including regular multi-stakeholder roundtables and briefings on major environmental trends. The Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues aim at linking different plastic issues to the governance question and encourage increased engagement in the run-up to various global environmental negotiations that will take place next year and the following. We want to understand how we are using specific global instruments to address the plastics crisis or how we could use them better. This second session focuses on climate and air pollution and is taking place a few days before the virtual Climate Ambition Summit co-hosted by the United Nations, the United Kingdom and France in partnership with Chile and Italy. This virtual summit will mark the 5th anniversary of the adoption of the Paris Agreement. In the past days, ambitious commitments toward reducing net emissions have been announced by various member states and companies. Let's see today also what the plastics crisis has to do with this. Before I give the floor to today's moderator, who will guide you through this session, let me briefly introduce you to our panel today. We have with us Her Excellency Ambassador Myriam Sherman, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom to the United Nations and other organizations in Geneva. She champions in making links with the various negotiations taking place in Geneva in the run-up to the next climate conference that is scheduled to take place in Glasgow next year. We have also with us Anare Lewenikila, the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Republic of Fiji to the United Nations in Geneva. Fiji is also a champion in pushing for climate and environmental considerations in the agenda of most negotiations ongoing in Geneva. In the US, we have with us Stephen Fate, who is a senior attorney focusing on climate and energy at the Center for International Environmental Law. We have also with us Dr. Steve and Dr. Deoni Allen, who work on microplastic research at the University of Strathclyde and who are presently in Lyon. From Paris, we have with us Elena Molin-Valdez, who is where she leads the Climate and Air Coalition Secretariat within the United Nations Environment Programme. And finally, I will soon let you in the hands of Jan Duzik, who is going to ensure the moderation of this event. Jan is a lead specialist within the WWF Arctic Programme. He was also the former director of the United Nations Environment in Europe and the former Minister of the Environment for the Czech Republic. Jan, I have the pleasure to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Diana, and good afternoon to all the speakers and to all the participants. It's a great pleasure to attend this session and to help run through what surely will be a very interesting program. Indeed, we will be looking at the different topics that are related to plastics, and specific purpose of this dialogue is to look at climate and air. And if we take all the three topics, plastic, climate, and air, and if we portray it to the year 2020, which is exceptional and difficult for everybody, we can see that there are clear linkages to all these three environmental features. And I hope that as the speakers will address as they research, they will also relate to where we are at this moment. But to start with, many people probably in a normal year would be in Glasgow now. They are not there, and we all hope that the same level of enthusiasm will be the case for 2021, when the meeting, the COP26 of the climate agreement will convene in Glasgow. But I would now like to ask Ambassador Sherman, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of the UK here in Geneva, to give to set the scene for our discussion today from her perspective. So
thank you very much indeed, Jan and Diana, and thank you, your Excellencies, colleagues, for joining us here today. I just wanted to start by thanking the Geneva Environment Network for organising today's discussion and for securing such an expert group of panellists. I'm only sorry that we can't be together in person for this discussion, but hopefully in a few months we can start meeting in person once again. It's always a real pleasure to represent the United Kingdom during these events. The Geneva Beat Plastic Pollution Dialogues is a brilliant initiative. Not only is this a priority policy area in the United Kingdom, this also I care about deeply on a personal level. And it's a real honour actually for me to be on a panel with such experts today. And I'm sure that we're all going to learn a lot about this important issue for our planet. As you're aware, the UK is hosting COP26 next year. Throughout our presidency, the UK's focus is going to be on encouraging countries to commit to ambitious NDCs and long-term strategies for net zero, ideally before the summit in Glasgow next November. To keep up momentum, our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is hosting a virtual climate ambition summit today, as you've heard, in partnership with Chile as COP25 president and Italy, which is our COP26 partner. This will coincide with the 5th anniversary of this agreement. The summit will be an important moment to drive forward collective action as we move towards COP26. It will be an opportunity for leaders to bring forward new commitments that put us firmly on a greener, more resilient and sustainable path. In fact, you might have seen that the UK announced a new NDC just last week. We're now aiming for at least a 68% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the end of the decade, compared to 1990 levels. Of course, we understand that not all countries will come forward with new NDCs or net zero commitments immediately. We recognise that many developing countries in particular have been impacted and plans subsequently delayed by COVID-19. We're also keenly aware of the fact that appetite for new climate finance commitments has dipped as countries struggle with the economic impact of the pandemic. We know that public finance will need to become a key 2021 presidency priority. As countries make their commitments, it's very important to recognise that tackling climate change is multifaceted. The plastic crisis, air pollution, and climate change are closely related. For example, changes in climate can result in impacts to air quality, and pollutants into the air can result in changes to the climate. That's why today is so important and timely. As COP26 president, the UK takes its leadership role in this area seriously. And international Geneva continue to try. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, and we wish you all the best, both in preparing for the Glasgow COP next year, but also, of course, for implementing the ambitious program that your government has recently announced as its NDC. And I think that we are all looking forward to the Climate Ambition Summit and how it can strengthen the momentum and how it can, in spite of the virtual setting that we are operating, put the climate momentum on the right path towards when the COP actually convenes. Thank you again. Let me turn to Mr. Anare Levenikila, the Deputy Permanent Representative of Fiji here in Geneva, and to share his perspective and how, from the perspective of the Republic of Fiji, how we can connect the topics that we are going to discuss today. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ian. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to be part of this important conversation today. At the outset, from a small island developing state perspective, there is no better time for enhanced ambition to fight climate change than the time that we are living in today. We can also say that COVID-19 has given us a head start in the race towards zero in terms of emission reduction and also in air quality. But we feel that the race towards zero requires everyone's contribution, whether it is as nations or as individuals. And on our part here as a mission in Geneva, we are working on two very important threads of work. One is the 2050 Today initiative by the Swiss government, which is focused on reducing our carbon footprint here. This is a small initiative, but it reflects an enhanced ambition towards climate change. We are also adamant that though our emission footprint is low, sometimes people say it could be insignificant, but in doing so, we are demonstrating that we are contributing to the much larger picture of what the world is trying to pursue today. Secondly is on this very important topic of plastics pollution, addressing plastic pollution, which we all know is a greatest threat to sustainable development. For us, the work on plastic is important because it is also intricately linked to climate change and oceans. The ocean is part of our way of life, and working on reducing plastics and marine litter in the ocean is central to the conversation that we are having on this particular initiative. In some sense, plastic also exacerbates climate change disruptions. For example, climate change, plastic bags can block drain, exacerbating flooding. It also affects our coral reefs, which undermines climate-stressed ecosystems, which are important for local economies and people who depend on it. We tend to look at the issue of also addressing plastics as a spectrum, where we have on one end actors working on trying to address plastics when it becomes waste. And also on the other end, which we probably say it could be the means to an end, where there is very few engagement by actors. So from this perspective, Fiji, in the ambit of the Committee on Trade and the Environment of the WTO, Fiji together with China is trying to grow the conversation around addressing sustainable plastics trade and how we work with international actors in the fight on addressing plastics pollution. Right now, we are putting together the foundation or the building blocks for coherent relations among this international community of practice of international actors to ensure that we have a complementarity in our efforts on reducing plastic pollution. And just finally, this is also another important step towards the much bigger conversation on circular economy, which is, I think, is also a growing conversation that we are having right now. By starting with the discussion on plastics, particularly on the aspect of trade, we can also contribute to that much larger discussion in the near future, which I think is very important in the work that we do in trying to endorse environment sustainability. Thank you, Jan.
Yes, thank you very much, Anara, for your words and showing on the example of Fiji how the issues of plastics and climate affect you both, and how you're also contributing to the solutions that need to be developed. I think that's a very important message. So let us now move to our experts that will present the two topics that we are relating to the issue of plastics. And the first will be Steve Veit, who is the senior attorney in SEAL, in the Climate and Energy Program of SEAL, and we'll speak about the study that SEAL has published last year on the impacts of the life cycle of plastic on climate and on the relation, and we will be then be able to discuss that. So, Steve, over to you, please.
Thank you so much. Can I get the sharing permission, please? Great. And you can all see my presentation? Great. Thanks, everyone. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Stephen Veit. I'm from the Center for International Environmental Law, and today I'm going to be talking about fossil fuels, plastics, and the planet. In 2017, so backing up a bit, CL released a briefing note called "Fueling Plastics Have Fracked Gas, Cheap Oil, and Unburnable Coal Are Driving the Plastics Boom." And the ultimate takeaway is that the US fracking boom has made natural gas really, really, really cheap. And that is driving a massive expansion in new infrastructure for plastics and petrochemicals. In the United States, this is also happening in Asia. And because of shipped gas and gas liquids from the United States, this is also starting to happen in Europe. And the reason for this is because plastic is fossil fuel in another form. 99% of plastics are derived from fossil fuel feedstocks, from oil or gas, or occasionally and rarely from coal. But this is not an accident or a coincidence. This is actually the plan. Petrochemicals are expected to be the largest driver of global oil demand growth from now through 2040, outpacing its use in transportation, in industry, in power, or in buildings. So against the backdrop of this massive expansion in petrochemical and plastic production, CL, along with a number of other organizations, released a report in 2019 called Plastic and Health, The Hidden Costs of a Plastic Planet, that outlined the human health impacts of the plastic life cycle. And then later in 2019, we released a report, Plastic and Climate, which talks about the climate impacts across the plastic life cycle. And that's what I'm here to talk about today. If you take nothing else from this presentation, take this. Greenhouse gases are emitted at each stage of the plastic life cycle. Plastic pollution is a significant and growing threat to the Earth's climate. And fundamentally, stopping the expansion of petrochemical and plastic production and keeping fossil fuels in the ground is a critical element in addressing the climate crisis. So the plastic life cycle, we divided into essentially 4 buckets. There's fossil fuel extraction and transportation, production and manufacturing of plastic, disposal of plastic waste, and then the ongoing environmental impact of plastic. And we'll take them one at a time. Extraction and transport of fossil fuels for plastic production produces significant greenhouse gases. Again, this is fossil fuel production, so this shouldn't be surprising. There are emissions from methane leakage and flaring and venting, from the fuel combustion and the energy usage in the process of drilling for oil or gas itself. And then, often ignored, the emissions from land disturbance when forests and fields are cleared for well pads or pipelines or other extractive activities. But by far the most emissions-intense process in the plastics life cycle is the actual production and manufacture of plastics. There's the cracking of alkanes into olefins, making the molecules ready to be turned into plastic, the polymerization and plasticization of those olefins into plastic resins, and then all of the other chemical refining processes to make the additives, the plasticizers, the dyes, everything that goes into what you ultimately recognize as plastic. This is an extraordinarily energy and emissions intense process. And in addition to requiring large inputs of electricity or heat, also has a large emissions profile just of direct greenhouse gas emissions, because again, we're working here with fossil fuels and hydrocarbons. Once plastic is used and disposed of, it is either landfilled, recycled, or incinerated if it is not lost to the environment. And of particular concern from a climate perspective is incineration. Because again, plastic is fossil fuel in another form. So burning plastic is burning fossil fuels. Our friends at Gaia constructed a set of scenarios. And the worst case scenario, the industrial outlook, where plastic production continues to increase and incineration as a method of managing plastic waste increases in its importance. By the year 2050, we could see over 300 million metric tons of net emissions of greenhouse gases just from burning plastic packaging alone. When you put all of that together, we estimate that last year, the entire plastic life cycle emitted at least 0.86 gigatons of greenhouse gas CO2 equivalents. That's equal to 189 500 megawatt coal plants running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If these trends continue by the year 2030, we could be talking about emissions equivalent to almost 300 coal plants, and by 2050, emissions equivalent to over 600. And you can see this represented in the chart or the graph on the right, emissions from incineration and production of resins and fibers. And at these levels, greenhouse gas emissions from the plastic life cycle could eat up 10 to 13% of the global carbon budget needed to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, which makes tackling the plastics crisis a fundamental and inextricable part of tackling the climate crisis. But finally, I want to talk quickly about plastic in the environment. Plastic in the oceans may also interfere with the ocean's capacity to absorb and sequester carbon dioxide. The oceans have absorbed about 30% of all anthropogenic carbon emitted since the dawn of the industrial era, and it's done this in part using the biological carbon pump. Phytoplankton at the surface ocean, similar to plants, uptake carbon when they produce food via photosynthesis. Those phytoplankton are eaten by zooplankton, and then through either excretion or respiration and death, small particles sink down into the deep oceans, moving that carbon from the surface down into the deep and making some room for more carbon to be absorbed from the atmosphere. And again, I don't want to overstate this, but I really don't want to understate this, that there's evidence that microplastic particles in the ocean are interfering with the development and reproduction of phytoplankton and zooplankton, which could threaten not just the biological carbon pump, but a huge chunk of the base of the marine food web. And although there are differences in where microplastics are distributed in the oceans, they are, as you can see, everywhere. So where that brings us to high priority actions we can take now. We can end the production and use of single-use disposable plastic. We can stop the development of new oil, gas, and petrochemical infrastructure. We can foster the transition to zero-waste communities and implement extended producer responsibility as a critical component of circular economies. And we can enforce and adopt ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors. And we need to do this while avoiding distractions like pyrolysis and chemical recycling and carbon capture use and storage. And to do this, it's worth noting, there are currently no efficient global instruments that address the petrochemical origins of plastic. So any instrument trying or claiming to address the plastic crisis, as we can see, should and must ensure that it includes measures along the whole life cycle to effectively limit plastic production and plastic pollution at the global level. Ultimately, stopping the expansion of petrochemical and plastic production and keeping fossil fuels in the ground provides the surest and most effective path to reducing the rising climate impacts of plastics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you for guiding us through the life cycle of plastic and how it affects, in particular, climate, but also in the wider environment, and noting that actually we don't have at the moment a ready instrument that would address this life cycle impact of plastic. And that's where you would want to see the focus. Just as I mentioned in the beginning, we are in a very struggling in terms with the COVID implications. One of the implications is the low oil and gas on the markets. Another one is the growth in single-use waste. How, from your perspective, how would you, in one sentence, assess where will 2020 leave us in terms of your findings and your conclusions that you made last year?
Well, in one sentence?
1 minute.
In brief, I think we've seen a ton has changed. The oil and gas markets have been hit really hard by the crisis, and that has affected some of the project level economics and the regional economics of the plastic expansion. We've seen the advantage of US production wane as oil prices have dropped and oil produced plastic has become more competitive. But ultimately, the push for an expansion in plastic production will continue in 2021. The push for additional fossil fuel production will also continue. So on the one hand, a lot has changed, but on the other hand, forces will be pushing to bring us back to that business as usual scenario as soon as they can.
Okay, understood. That was a good, concise answer. Well, not so optimistic, but to the point. So let me thank you, Stephen, and let me move to the related topic, but this time we'll be talking about air pollution. And I would like to invite Steve Allen and Donnie Allen to share with us the results of their research, in particular to the microplastics and the impacts of plastics on the atmosphere, and what we need to complement the knowledge after having heard from Stephen. So Steve and Dee, please.
Thank you. If we could just have the share, there we go. Can everybody see our screen okay? Yes? Great.
Awesome. Thank you, Jan, and thank you to the Geneva Environment Network for organising this event. We are Doctors Steve and Donnie Allen, and our research is on air transport of micro and nanoplastic, mainly in remote areas. It's a very new field of study. When we published our Nature Geoscience paper last year showing atmospheric transport of microplastics, it kicked off a flurry of new research into this topic. Our sites are the Pyrenees to the Tibetan Plateau, Mount Everest, the poles, and many other places around the world. We also studied the ocean to air exchange of microplastic, showing that the sea breeze can be loaded with microplastic particles. The bubble ejection from waves breaking ejects the plastic into the air the same way as gigatons of sea salt gets ejected every year. There's a young researcher in Beirut University, Maritz Lehmann, who's currently working on models of rainfall ejection, which may be more applicable to freshwater bodies, but it's very promising.
So, as Steve mentioned, the atmospheric microplastics is a very new field of research that started only about 4 years ago in Paris with some research done by Rashid Driss. So this map that's on the image up here has a number of sampling points around the world that have been analysed. This is not the number of studies, just the number of sampling points where we've looked at atmospheric microplastics so far. Everywhere we find it, but it's where we're not looking in enough places to understand exactly what's happening. We need to know how much plastic is in the air, where it's going, and importantly, where it came from, so we might have a hope of slowing it down and slowing down the contamination. We know that the ocean is a source of airborne microplastic, and that's going to be very hard to mitigate, but there is a potential to stop land-based sources if we can find them. So cities are considered a very obvious source of microplastic. For example, the air that was tested in Shanghai was found to contain a staggering 5,700 particles per cubic metre of air. Airborne microplastic is adding to air pollution in cities. The study didn't look at very small particles, but our research does. And what we do know, the particle count rises almost exponentially as the particles get smaller. The average person breathes about 16 cubic metres of air per hour. That means we could be about per 8-hour day, sorry. This means that we could be breathing in a considerable amount of both micro and nanoplastic in our work and in our home environment. And our current work, and that of Stephanie Wright in Imperial College, is showing that the respirable size, which is the PM 2.5 size fraction, is actually out there in the air, and we're looking at how much. So we now also have the ability to measure nanoplastics through our collaborators in the Utrecht University with Dr. Dusan Materik.
So many of these speakers in these dialogues will describe what phthalates are, but just because we don't use BPA in food packaging anymore, it doesn't mean you won't eat it or breathe it. We've been disposing of plastic into the environment for decades, and we still don't know what the other chemicals are that are in it. Like the list of known chemicals in food packaging alone is over 12,000, and 29% of those don't have easily accessible toxicity reports, and that's food grade. Everything else is largely unregulated and considered trade secrets. Thousands of forever chemicals like flame retardants are also in plastic. Burning it just releases them. In Indonesia, they were using plastic waste as fuel for a tofu plant. This resulted in a toxic fallout that created local chicken eggs containing 75 times the acceptable dioxin levels. And that's just one story. There are many studies showing flame retardant in the air and water and biota all over the globe in increasing amounts.
So atmospheric microplastic particles travel across countries, across continents, and across oceans. On the right is illustrated microplastic transport from multiple locations around the globe that's reaching the Tibet Plateau. On the left are transport models showing annual deposition of brake and tyre wear microplastic across the world as a result of atmospheric transport. With selective sampling, we can actually use these models to point to specific source regions of where these atmospheric microplastics might be coming from. So there's one obvious thing you can see here. There are no borders in nature. No matter how clean your backyard is, no matter how perfectly your circular economy and your plastic economy is, you will not be free of atmospheric microplastics or nanoplastics while there are other countries out there continuing to release plastics into the environment. This also means you can't just ship the plastic problem away. The low and middle income countries that plastic is being shipped to do not necessarily have the facilities to deal with it. In fact, even high income countries often don't have the capacity to deal with them. Burning that's happening in low temperature fires releases toxins and small microplastic particles and nanoplastics into the air. So what you threw away in the recycling this morning could come back to you in the air that you breathe over a trip that goes around the world from the recycling station in the next days to weeks to months.
So all this blowing around in the wind also has other consequences. Airborne plastic has reached the Arctic, the Antarctic, and even Mount Everest and US national parks. And we're not talking about the careless hiker leaving a water bowl behind. Plastics released decades ago can release micro and nanoplastics that become airborne. And we have released a lot of plastic since we started making it. That's resulted in airborne microplastic reaching our wilderness areas. And we're talking 365 microplastics per square metre per day in a remote area. Our wilderness areas are our biodiversity reserves. We know that the micro and nanoplastics have effects on growth and reproduction for many organisms, from soil microbes to plants and on up the food chain. And the arrival of plastic into these areas means we could be losing species we don't even know about yet. So there's a global concern amongst scientists about how much plastic is going into and coming back out of the world's oceans and lakes. Recently, we co-organised a WMO-sponsored workshop with working groups 38 and 40 of GSAMP, which I'm sure you're familiar with. We invited the world's top microplastics, oceanographers and atmospheric scientists to discuss the possible significance and impacts of the air-sea exchange of micro and nanoplastics. It's unfortunately too early to discuss the findings of the workshop, but we can assure you the report will be a very important document when it's released. So given what was spoken about here today, it's worth relating airborne plastic pollution to the SDGs. And the first one we'll look at is health. We're only just scratching the surface of health effects, but it's turning up in gut, lung and placental samples. And the chemicals are already causing developmental problems in humans, and PM2.5 micro and smaller nanoplastics can enter deep into the lung, carrying their chemicals. Now, it's very hard to imagine a sentence that starts with the health benefits of breathing microplastics are. Gender equality, women and girls are often workers in recycling plants, which likely exposes them to high concentrations of airborne plastic. Water security, airborne plastic can pollute drinking water catchments. How much plastic can be in the water before it becomes unsafe, we don't know. But most microplastic scientists feel that the WHO report from last year is out of date, as new research is coming out every day suggesting cause for concern. Reducing inequality, low-income countries should not have to deal with our waste. The prevalence of airborne plastic around ad hoc recycling centres and illegal dump sites is likely to be many times higher than in high-income countries. Sustainable cities. Airborne plastic is already adding to air pollution in our cities and urban areas. Responsible consumption and production. Plastic is currently a near linear product that has to change, and replacing it with bioplastic, it appears, is not the answer. Climate change. We know that plastic is a carbon-intensive product, as Stephen said, It even releases methane when it oxidizes. But there are scientists starting to look at whether airborne plastic particles could affect cloud formation, and that would have an impact on climate change. Conserve our oceans. We don't know exactly how much plastic is entering by air yet, but the airborne plastic research community thinks the numbers are substantial, and it arrives to the ocean in a ready-to-eat size for many sea creatures like plankton. Life on land. Airborne plastic poses a risk to us and our ecosystems, no matter how remote it is from humans. Apologies. Policy needs to be informed by solid science that we don't have yet. Relying on plastic manufacturers to ensure their product is safe and gets recycled is clearly not working. The plastic boom is not consumer driven, and it's not consumers that are the problem with the waste. The industry needs to be reinvented from the ground up and fast. Recyclability needs to be designed into the product, and it has to easily be recycled in the area that it's sold. Single-use plastic, it's the low-hanging fruit. Governments are banning bags and straws, and it looks like they're doing the right thing, but it's just scratching the surface. They're not tackling global waste management in a meaningful way, which is what governments need to do. So now what we know about airborne plastic, it's worth going back to this slide and asking if we know enough about this emerging pollutant. The planet has never had as much airborne plastic as we do now, so the effects are unknown. It's a giant experiment, and plastic use and mismanagement is on the rise. There may be a threshold where damage is irreversible, an amount released into the environment that we can't capture, that eventually becomes airborne. And we better hope that we haven't already passed it. Thanks, and back to you, Jen.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dia and Steve, for a presentation which has a lot of information and showing yet another perspective of a life cycle impact of plastic, and including the legacy pollution which we have already produced, and that will have the impacts on air quality for but also reminding us that current regulation is not sufficient, not integrated enough, and that global solutions are needed because the impact is global. It's not only about the plastic bottles which are traveling through the oceans, but the transmission through the air and the long-term persistence. And I think it was also good to show the sustainable development perspective of the problem that again underlines why the ecosystems like the Geneva Environment Network are an appropriate mechanism to look at this. So with that, let me go back to our representatives of the countries who are kind of pinpointed by the scientists that they are expected to take action. We have heard about some of the action in their introductory remarks, but I would now like to go back to firstly Anare Lemenikila from the mission of Fiji to describe in reaction to what you've heard and what your country has been doing. How do you see building on this information and connecting the dots for the regulation that is being negotiated at the moment? Another, please.
The conversation that we are having is really very interesting in terms of what the science has been saying. I think in terms of looking at the issues that we have, firstly, from the regional perspective in terms of the Pacific region, I think a lot of what has been shared is also some of the things that we are currently working on right now. We had just recently had a gap analysis by the Environmental Investigation Agency and the Center for International Environment Law, looking at the landscape of the legal framework, regulatory framework, our policies and plans across the whole of the Pacific region and all the countries. I think that a lot of the gaps have been identified in relation to what have been shared. But I guess the most important one is words into action in terms of looking at how we can build on some of the things that the science is telling us in terms of looking at the way forward. But first and foremost, for the region, Now we are looking at supporting a global and regional binding framework to address plastic pollution as outlined in our Pacific Regional Maritime and LITA Action Plan. So looking at the discussion that is going on, we have heard from numerous and in recent forums is a call for Pacific states to have an ambiguous legally binding agreement rather than voluntary. So which could apply at the global, regional and national level. I think that is the growing conversation that we're having at our region. In terms of looking at some of the action, we are already witnessing this commitment with over 70% of the Pacific Island nations, including Fiji, implementing policies to ban single-use plastics, and another 25% committed to doing so. So in terms of looking at the regional landscape, and we have also identified some potential gaps. So I will just read out some of the potential gaps that has been identified, which we feel is important, and also reflect some of the issues that has already been raised. One is just to look at global and national reduction targets. I think setting national targets is something that countries should work on in terms of looking at addressing plastic waste. Another one is just technology transfer and capacity building. I think we heard about the need to recycle plastics, but for us, we are spread across vast regions. Having a big recycling waste in one country would be uneconomical. How do you see transferring waste to a nearby location in terms of, so those are some of the things in terms of looking at technology transfer and capacity building. One of the things is just that we've managed just on control of plastics production, which has just been presented by our colleague recently. So that is, how do we do that? Fiji, the Pacifics are very small countries, but I think it is in the work that we are doing right now in Geneva, like at the WTO, to start the conversation, is that for some of the countries who are engaged in production to actively engage in how do we look at alternatives to plastics production. And also in terms of looking at design and labeling standards, that is something that we are also trying to look at as a region to better know what kind of imports are we getting in relation to plastic and which are the ones that should be considered to be limited. So those are some of the conversations that we are having right now. Phasing out avoidable plastic products and a transition to circular economy. As I alluded to earlier, that is also a growing conversation in the WTO right now in terms of looking at the whole life cycle of plastics and how do we look at this, but it is just the beginning of a conversation, and I think with the involvement of the states that are members of WTO, it's very important that we collaborate, we come together and to ensure that this becomes a work of the WTO to ensure that we can reach some of what has been talked about in relation to production. Because it ultimately for production, it'll come back to member states as they most rely on these industries for growth and all that. But if we come together and to start the conversation and the discussion, these are very important milestones to be achieved in terms of what the science has been saying and what countries in the WTO, in other important forums that really need to work on. In the gap analysis, one of the key findings from the gap analysis that we know is that in the Pacific region, we tend to be siloed in our approach to addressing plastic pollution. I think most importantly, that dovetails from how the international frameworks are framed. For example, in a lot of discussions in some forums, when we talk about plastics, they say, no, that is the role of UNEP. That should not be brought to the discussion. But as I said, there are some trade dimensions that need to be considered, that we need to work together in terms of coherent. Now, we must not only say coherent as a word, but we need to put that into action. I think that is what is the greatest challenge that we have. But it is on, as we have mentioned, it is the onus on states to start to look at environment sustainability, the impacts of climate change that we have been hearing from the experts today, and how we better frame the discussion that we have to ensure that we achieve environment sustainability. So, I think there's a lot of good information that has been shared by the expert. I think it's just the way we frame it in the discussion of diplomats to better understand how this becomes a national issue in terms of the global issues that we are facing, to better understand, to guide the work in this various multilateral organizations. I think that's the word coherent is for us to just all come together, look at what the science is saying, and how do we put this into action in terms of bringing all these international actors working on plastics together to ensure that we can achieve enduring results. I think that's my contribution for that particular issue. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Anar. And I hear you that you're mentioning a lot about economy and trade and that they need to be part of the solution. And of course, you as a country, together with other countries in the small island development states, you can be part of the solutions. You can learn from one another. But ultimately, this is a conversation that is on a bigger scale, and that is on a bigger scale than just the environmental community. So thank you very much. Let me turn to Miriam Sherman again for the United Kingdom perspective, and what would be your takeaways from the presentations that we heard today for your policy work in the UK on climate, on air quality, on plastics.
Thank you very much indeed, Jan, and it's been really good to hear the research going into this area and the different perspectives. And first I want to say thank you, Your Excellency, for the view from Fiji and the perspective of a small island developing state. I think you've shown us how critical it is to tackle both plastic pollution and wider climate change, and how we need to think of the whole planet and of all the states on this planet as we look at this issue. And thank you also for raising the importance of the role of trade organisations and the WTO. I just wanted to reflect a little bit on what I've heard from Steve Feit and also Steve and Dee Allen. I thought both were extremely sobering presentations. Steve Feit, it was really it was, you know, I think it's a real wake-up call to all of us to see the real danger that plastics present to our planet and the link to petrochemicals use, and the fact that what, you know, helps us so much as a human race in having the lifestyles that we've become accustomed to is also slowly killing our planet. And I think that was brought into very sharp relief by what we heard from Steve and Dee Allen. And you know, there's some of those statistics and some of those numbers about plastic in the air and how what we do in our everyday lives, which we think are completely innocuous, are actually affecting people right on the other side of the world, and also affecting our natural wildernesses. And even our own bodies, in fact, you know, how everything is being slowly polluted by plastic, and how we need to address it. So I was going to say a few things on what we're trying to do nationally on plastics, although I realise that, you know, a lot more still needs to be done by every single one of us if we really are going to tackle what is becoming a scourge on our planet. Our policy development in this area is about increasing the recycling of plastic and reducing the amount of virgin material being used to make new plastic. As we know, this will have a positive impact on carbon emissions. And we're proud that we're the first major economy to put its net zero commitment into law. We're busy drafting further legislation to reduce waste and keep resources in the system for longer, leaving behind our traditional linear economic model and creating a more sustainable and efficient circular model from which the environment, the economy and society can hopefully all benefit. And we want to move the British society away from a take, make, use and throw approach to resources and materials to a waste, reuse, recycle and repair one. There are many other examples of what we've done domestically. We've banned billions of single-use plastics, like plastic straws and stirrers and cotton buds. We introduced a charge for single-use plastic bags, and we reduced their sales by 7 billion a year. We've introduced a ban on microbeads in rinse-off personal care products, and we're shifting the onus from consumers to producers and trying to make sure that businesses take full responsibility for the lifetime costs of their products. And we want businesses of the future to think twice before they sell, for example, a sprig of parsley encased in a brick of plastic. The UK's got more plans in the pipeline, and subject to consultation, we're looking into the implementation of a deposit return scheme for drinks containers, for example. From 2023, we're going to ensure that the collection of household waste is done in a consistent way across our country, including the types of plastics collected. And we're planning a tax on plastic packaging that contains less than 30% recycled content, with consultations ongoing on that. What's clear is that around the world, people want to see plastic solved, and where we can, we want to support the best that's on that. We've committed £7 million to tackling plastic waste for our clean ocean science. We lead alongside Vanuatu, and I'm very pleased that our Fijian friends are also part of this initiative. Also invested 2.6 million UK aid into plastic action plan, which is being matched by. You asked me also to the UK confirmed support for this. If successful, it could be akin to the or completion. So we're urging other countries to support these negotiations in the hope that they can begin at the earliest opportunity. We need to pursue global solutions for tackling the plastic problem and on microplastics. So we must make sure that alternatives are not actually more harmful than plastic itself. It's crucial that we ensure that one country's solution does not have negative impacts. In some cases, of course, we probably have to accept that plastic is the material of an international bank was demonizing plastic has important uses, for example. But we should focus on using plastic the best way possible, as well as reusing and recycling it as much as we can. And finally, we need to keep improving our understanding of costs. We will keep supporting research in this area and make commitments like language research going on the panel today. So I'm going to leave it there. Yeah, in the interest of time, but thank you very much. A second.
Thank you so much, Miriam Sherman, for a range of things that the UK government is planning and doing, and also for highlighting that the global framework, global collaboration is essential, including through an agreement. And it's encouraging to hear that the UK government is supportive of such a comprehensive global instrument on the plastic litter. And it's also interesting to hear about the combined solutions between the public and private sectors, and how they can contribute to finding those solutions. Thank you again. Let me now turn to the last speaker for today, and I know we are running short of time, but hopefully we can still first of all hear from Helena, and then have maybe 2-3 questions from the chat reflected. So Helena Molin-Valdez has been heading the Secretariat of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and combining the 2 topics already. And now I would ask Helena, bringing the 3rd topic in, the plastic, and heard what the experts as well as the country representatives have said. How does it all make sense? Where do you see, from your CCAC experience, what can be good solutions for the future policy? Helena.
Yes, thank you so much, Jan, and everybody who has spoken so far. This has been extremely informative for me. I was invited to talk about a governance model, as the Climate and Clean Air Coalition has now been up and running for 8 years. as a potential learning also in the plastics. So I'm not going to focus on plastics per se, because we haven't really done that. And maybe this is also a lesson learned now. How do we combine things, and how do we actually make sure everything is somewhat connected? So when it comes to just a few words on the coalition, the Climate and Clean Air Coalition was founded in 2012. From 6 countries as founding members. Now we have more than 70 countries across all the regions, and 75 plus international organizations and NGOs, including most of the relevant bodies. And we work with a wide range of cities and businesses together. The Secretariat is hosted at UNEP, but really most of the UN organizations have something related to this topic. So first of all, it's the needs, no? How do we move? Talking about governance, this is a voluntary framework. It's not a legally binding one, but it has clearly set out a niche to address a specific set of pollutants, black carbon, which is a particulate matter, a small, very tiny, small part of PM 2.5. We heard about this already in the presentation earlier. Methane, which of course is very linked to the petrochemical industry as well, where I can see the connection with the plastic conundrum, HFCs and tropospheric ozone. So it's about the integrated solutions to address both air pollution and climate change. And I don't still see the exact connection to plastics, but I'm sure we can find one. I just wanted to set this stage for who we are. We do have, so in terms of the governance model, since the beginning of the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, the approach has been very much to work in the nexus between climate and air quality, work from the ground up, where you empower the partners to achieve their national goals, but also to help them to set national goals in this field of short-lived climate pollution. But it has also been a top-down exercise where we have convened ministerial meetings and other leadership meetings to drive a high-level ambition within the existing legally binding frameworks. In this case, we already have now 2 legally binding frameworks which did not exist when this coalition was set out, actually, which is the Paris Agreement on climate, and the Montreal Protocol has a Kigali amendment that is now regulating HFC consumption and production. So part of the work of the coalition and the ministerial level leadership part of the coalition was really to try to influence these agreements to take full account of the scientific evidence, but also to give them proper relevance, let's say, to reduce these emissions, which was not the case when the coalition was created. So another approach that we have had from the beginning is to work in enhancing capacity at national level to be able to catalyze action that really benefits people's lives locally. And then finally, it has been very much, working peer-to-peer, working together and helping each other succeed and to showcase what's really possible. And when I listen to you, all the presentations so far, and the ambassador from Fiji and UK, I think what has been extremely helpful is to have this opportunity to drive ambitious action in a few areas, in a few places, and then to widely disseminate this and learning by peer pressure and also by engaging countries with each other. So since the coalition was formed in 2012, we now just this year, towards the end of this year, just recently, and the intention was to launch this at COP26 in Glasgow, but we just adopted a new strategy 2030, which also goes hand in hand with the Sustainable Development Goals and the time frame set out by the IPCC last 1.5 report, which really makes the case for fast action. And we don't have a lot of time now to avoid the dangerous tipping points in the climate. And short-lived climate pollutants will help in building that fast mitigation trail that can influence the temperature avoidance in the near term while we work on the long-term CO2 emissions and them kicking in. So what the coalition has now worked hard on is to establish a new strategy, these three intersecting directions of driving this ambition at highest level. And I can see the plastics and listening to the previous presentation and the scientific evidence, I would be really happy to explore how we can engage a little bit more in this topic as well. And while we support the national and transformative actions in the context of NDCs and others, and finally underpin this by advancing policy relevant research and analysis. And the important part of this learning of the CCAC's way of operating, I think, is really the partners and the countries and the other technical partners as the driver of change. And working on the ground has been incredibly multiplying, because each of the initiatives in the specific sectors have different leaders from countries and in the international community, and they have been able then to influence their own institutions. And I just come to the slide here to wrap up with some of the gaps and lessons learned that I could eventually try to make the linkage to the plastics area. So one is, of course, the scientific evidence. We've already heard the previous presentations about the lack of some of the scientific evidence, and I think this is a challenge for that I'm sure that many of the scientific institutions would be happy to jump on. So putting peer pressure also from the national communities, since campaigns and raising the awareness of the issue has been very successful so far on the plastic, I would say. And we often use the plastic as an example of how to drive public opinion towards a topic. So how can we now get the scientific evidence to catch up? I think it's important. And the second one is to keep this high-level commitment high. We heard already from you that this is definitely happening. And how can this leadership or other leaders help setting national and regional targets? The third one is, of course, the multi-stakeholder engagements and using these as influencers, which I think in the plastics field, as I said, has been extremely successful so far. Is there more that could be done? I saw in the chat that somebody talked about education and making this part of programs, etc., which I think is an excellent way. And finally, there is a lot of discussions between the voluntary versus legally binding agreements. And in the case of the air and climate, of course, we have the Paris Agreement, which is the biggest air agreement in the world, I say. But we don't have a lot we don't have real binding agreements globally to regulate air pollution. There is the LERTAP in the UNECE region, but that's basically it. And then there are a few less comprehensive agreements in parts of Asia. That's it. But that means that it's, in my opinion at least, that it could be extremely helpful to and powerful to have structured voluntary frameworks such as the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, because by some of the positive parts of being a voluntary framework is that it can be much more flexible and nimble and action oriented and act fast without dragging, let's say, the difficult time perspectives that sometimes come with this legally binding. And then it can then also become a very strong complement to the existing legally binding agreements. And I'm sure that in the plastic field, build on some of the chemical agreements could be something to consider. I heard that you suggested to maybe get to a binding agreement, which is, of course, a good thing because it becomes more regulatory. The problem is always, as somebody also mentioned in the presentations, the enforcement of this kind of legally binding agreements. And finally, to continue with the campaigns and engagement of the community to keep the topic on everybody's mind, and combine this with some financial instruments. We have a trust fund in the Climate and Clean Air Coalition, and through this trust fund, which is then based also on voluntary contributions, we have been able to really put funding towards some transformative actions. The activities that then had been picked up by other multilateral funds or national budgets themselves. I think it's an important component as well to think of having some kind of resource to drive the ambition also in the plastics. So we have many UN resolutions on pollution, and in the field of air quality, there is within the World Health Assembly a very important one, and of course in UNEA, the United Nations Environment Assembly, we have a pollution action plan that now includes all things, but it's not very clear, and there might still be room for also making a little bit more on that side, which will not lead us to a legally binding agreement, of course, but by having either the UN General Assembly or UNEA strongly behind, we can accelerate this even more. So thank you, Jan. I'm not going to talk anymore now, and I hope this can also help moving this subject forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Helena. And I think that in your presentation, including in the last slide where you summarized some of the recommendations from what is now a mature partnership that has started as a small but has really evolved into a great interest and great network with concrete solutions in between research, policy, and implementation, which I think all of these elements we tried to address in our session today. So thank you for this inspiration and kind of advice from the CCAC. We have run out of time, but I know that my colleagues in the Gen Secretariat were trying to summarize if there are any, maybe 2, maximum 3 questions that we could still address while we have the speakers online. Now let's try to do it. So I'm turning to Malu and Diana if they can advise us.
Yes, hi everybody. So the first set of questions is about collaboration and agreements. How do we explore collaborative efforts that conjoin projects already underway? And why is there just a global agreement on marine plastic? Why is it not the whole value chain, which also includes soil pollution? The second set of questions relate to greenhouse gases. Plastic is excellent at trapping heat. Isn't plastic becoming the new frontier for fossil industries? They are aware that they will have to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions burned for our daily activities and hope to be able to keep drilling to produce the new raw materials for plastics, which will also later be burned after they are used. And the third set of questions relate to waste and recycling. COVID is encouraging the use of single-use plastics. What do you see as solutions to this problem? And can we also expect industries to have minimum content of recycled plastic in them? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Malu, and I think all good questions. I'm not sure we will have answers to all of these questions with our panelists here, but maybe let's turn to our main presenters. So first, Stephen, and then Steve and Dee, if they want to address some of the aspects. And for all the other questions, which we are not able to address here, there will be an opportunity to come back to the material from today's meeting. Stephen, any comments?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of how to take these in order. First, I think the comment or the question about marine plastic or marine litter rather than the whole of the plastic life cycle is an apt one. One thing I think that causes that, it's not necessarily a solution, but it's important to understand the cause, is that, you know, plastic is seen as a product that or a material that comes from nowhere and goes to nowhere. And the industry has done a really good job of obscuring how plastic gets to your shelf, and then instilling this belief that once you put it in the US, it's a little blue container, but whatever your recycling container is, once you put it in there, you're good and you don't have to worry about it. And so I think the beaches and the marine debris is the most visible obvious impact, and every other piece of it is obscured either by complicated supply chains or literally because you can't see microplastics. So I think it's an important point, and one that needs to be kind of talked about more, is all the other impacts of the plastic supply chain. The point about plastic being the frontier for growth of the oil industry is also accurate and really, really important. This is where these companies see their growth in the 21st century. Even without taking climate change into account, plastic is anticipated to grow much, much faster than oil or gas, and that is that is really where they see the growth. So this is exactly right. It's the frontier. I forget what the other question.
The whole single-use waste in relation to COVID. Anything?
Oh yes, we did see earlier in the COVID crisis, in kind of the first phase of it, we saw the plastics industry really pushing to get single-use disposable plastic designated as, safer or more hygienic. And so we do see this push. I think it is a real concern that those trends may accelerate in that direction. Although I will say, I think what we're also seeing, what's in the COVID context specifically, but also more generally, is that plastic sort of allows for these broad international linear supply chains, whereas more circular economy, zero waste models rely much more on local control of resources. And as we've seen COVID kind of tear apart all of our assumptions about, the way the world has been operating and things we took for granted, I think we're also seeing a real growing awareness of the risks and the complications of these kind of broad international supply chains rather than, local-based reuse refill models. And I'll stop there because I realize we're low on time.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Stephen B., do you want to complement Stephen very briefly, please?
Yeah, I think Stephen Fate's probably the best person to answer the plastics as a new frontier for oil and gas, and we clearly agree with you totally.
Yeah, I think there's not enough people out there that understand that the push for fracking is for plastic, not for fuel. And once we get that across, that might actually help change people's perception of what fracking is about. At the moment, they don't understand.
I mean, the ex-head of plastics in the US even said himself that nobody seriously thought of recycling was going to happen. It wasn't part of the plan. So, but why only marine? Yeah, great question. Marine science has had funding now because it's been around for so long. They continue to get funding. Atmospheric microplastics is virtually unheard of, and the research institutes won't give us money to do it because it's too new, it's too scary. How we do it is very scary. It's all very frontiery, and they don't really like doing that. So we struggle a bit with that. That's why it's just marine at the moment, and we have a little bit of freshwater being done, and soil science is just starting to catch up, which is how we know that it's affecting soil biota, etc.
Some of the impact or the issues with doing atmospheric plastics and the link between climate and air. So there's an argument going on between whether plastic is part of the climate conversation or whether it's battling against the climate conversation. And we as the plastic research community are trying to make it really clear that climate change and plastic are the same thing. You can't split them apart. They are totally part of the same package, not just because of where plastic comes from and how we make it, but also because of what the plastic does once it degrades and goes back into your environment. It's part of the cycle, and we have to get that across somehow in a really clear and easily understandable way to not just the people that are making the policy, but the people that are buying, selling and making the plastic as well.
And as to COVID-19, I think Stephen handled that quite well. As a scientist, I can say that it's completely illogical to use plastic over paper because COVID-19 lives on plastic quite well.
Really well.
So it doesn't make any sense to us.
Yeah. One of the things that we would suggest is that people start to need to think about plastic as something you're going to eat. So we currently have regulations about food grade plastic and the chemicals that are in it and how you manage it and what quality it has to be. But every single piece of plastic that's ever been made has the potential to be something that you eat or you breathe. So you can't think of plastic as food grade and non-food grade because it all ends up either in the air, in the soil, in your water, or in potentially in some part of that cycle. So whether it's because you threw it away today or a year ago or 20 years ago, there is the potential for that plastic to be something that you're going to eat tomorrow or breathe in tomorrow. So if we end up contemplating plastic as food grade, period, and all plastic is looked at that way, it might be one way to step forwards to start realizing the risks and the potential impacts that are associated with this particular product.
We should probably not take up any more of your time.
Thank you very much. I think that you provided great answers, all three of you, and of course, with all this conversation, we have just lifted the lid a little bit, and we see how many other connected things there are, and I think that it's important to realize those connections and to see what's the mass of the issue that we need to address, and of course that was not the objective of the session to resolve it today, but I think some important realizations are coming out of it. So with that, I would like to thank very much all the panelists and presenters. It was great, and I'm turning it over back to Diana for closing the event.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you indeed to all the panelists. This was a very interesting discussion, and it was just the beginning of the discussion from what we understood, and it will continue on the webpage of the event where you will find a summary of this event as well as all the documents that were presented and the video of this event.